Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Um, my name is Persis Karim. I'm the director for the Center for Iranian Diaspora Studies at San Francisco State University, and it is my great pleasure to have you all with us today, along with our two wonderful guests, Sholeh Asghari, who's going to be in conversation with my dear friend Rashin Fahandej. They're both really accomplished and magnificent artists who delve in the realm of sound and video and other forms. And they are going to be talking today about A Father's Lullaby, which is Rashin's contribution to an exhibit that's currently at the SOMART's Cultural Center in San Francisco called Sounds Like Home, Longing and Comfort Through Lullabies, curated by the two fabulous sisters, Duygu and Bengu Gün, who are with us today. And Rashin and Sholeh are going to be talking a little bit about the specific project that Rashin has been involved with for the last 2 years, I think. And I'm going to step out once I make the introductions and let these two women talk with each other. And we invite you to ask questions and offer your comments towards the end of the program. If there's something that you're itching to say, you can also put it in the chat, and I'll leave it to Sholeh to remark whether she wants to engage in that. I also want to thank today some other people who made this event, as well as Rashin's contribution to the SOMARTS exhibit possible. So in addition to the Center, Diaspora Arts Connection, and Nazi Kavyane is the founder and director, and she's in the house today. Raise your hand, Nazi. And then the Bita Daryabari Foundation, which is involved with UC Davis Department of Comparative Literature and the program in Middle East and South Asian Studies, also made possible their contribution. And then, of course, SOMART's Cultural Center in San Francisco. And if you wanted to learn more about the Sounds Like Home exhibit, please go to somarts.org. We have a few links in the chat. Shariar, maybe you could put somarts.org to learn more about how you can actually go to the exhibit. It has some limited hours. And maybe Rashin can talk a little bit about her contribution to this larger exhibit. Sholeh is an Iranian-born interdisciplinary sound artist whose practice is shaped by her early somatic experience as a refugee, situating the body as a site of knowledge. Her immersive works, performance, and audience participatory scores implicate the viewer participant into future mythological excavations, bridging large swaths of time and history through water, water clocks, crude oil, movement, light, imaging, voice, and sound. She's exhibited at Sotheby's Institute of Art in New York, Minnesota Street Project, Charlotte Street Foundation, and Gray Area Foundation for the Arts. She's a 2020 California Arts Council grantee for her participatory performance series Majles, of which I had the pleasure of attending one of the events. She is also a recipient of a 2019 Kenneth Rainin Foundation New Commissioning Grant through Dance Elixir, and a recipient of a 2014 Alternative Exposure Grant for curatorial initiatives. She's participated in numerous residencies, current and most recently including the Mass MoCA and the Headland Center for the Arts and the Real Time and Space 2021 project. She received her MFA from Mills College and her BA from San Francisco State University, and she's lectured extensively on photography. Rashin Fahandej is a transdisciplinary artist and an independent filmmaker. She's also an assistant professor of emerging and interactive media at Emerson College. She's an Iranian American, and her projects center on marginalized voices and the role of media, technology, and public collaboration in generating social change. She is a proponent of art as ecosystem, and she defines her projects as poetic cyber movement for social justice. where art mobilizes a plethora of voices by creating connections between public places and virtual spaces. She's the founder of A Father's Lullaby, a multi-platform co-creative project that highlights the role of men in raising children and their absence due to racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Marginalia, a series of poetic documentaries about Baha'i immigrants of Iranian descent, narrates a historical persecution in their homeland. She's also served as artistic director of the Rebuilding the Gwozdek Synagogue at Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews in the Boston area. And she's been a resident at the Boston Center for the Arts. You can read more about her on her website. I'm not going to read her extensive and full biography because we want to get to the good stuff, which is their conversation. But I invite you to learn more about both these artists. They're doing fantastic work. And one of the reasons I'm so pleased about sharing Rashin's work around A Father's Lullaby is that it does exactly what we would like to do with the center, which is crosses into new areas of collaboration and different communities, and bridging some of the social justice issues around racial inequities and racism that Iranians need to engage with. So I'm really pleased to have you both today. Thank you so much. And I look forward to your exchange.
This is a 4-minute excerpt from a 26-minute immersive installation. So just to give you a sense of when you are in the installation, what might be the experience of the audio and visual experience. So I'll go ahead and
brown-skinned girl, stay home and mind, baby. I'm going away on a sailing boat, and if I don't come back, stay home and mind, baby.
She's standing right in front of me, speaking words of wisdom. Let it be.
Well, when I first got sentenced, I was sentenced to 360 months, which is 30 years. My 28-year-old son now, he was 7 years old. And the twins, they were 45 days old. Now, I've just been released a few months ago. They're 21 now.
Like something dissolves in water. Like something dissolves in water. Dissolves in water. Place where there lullabies like transcend, dissolves in rattling bones, and earth side thing dissolves in water.
When I go to my brother and I say, brother, help me please. Sometimes he winds up knocking me back on my knees. Well, there have been times when I thought I couldn't last for long, but somehow I'm able to carry on. It's been a long, long time coming.
beneath a load of guilt and shame, shackled by a heavy burden,
where their music transcends
beneath
rattling bones
a
and
load of
earth
guilt
beside it.
and shame.
For those blessed mothers.
Thank you, Rashin John. Excuse me. Thank you. That was so beautiful. So I'll introduce what the project is. So begun in 2016, A Father's Lullaby is an ongoing community co-creative initiative, a poetic movement where art, technology, and the creative process become catalysts to mobilize voices and activate public places and virtual spaces for more inclusive dialogues. The project highlights the role of men in raising children and how their absence due to racial disparities in the criminal justice system impacts their children and women of lower income communities. This project centers marginalized voices of absent fathers while inviting everyone to participate by singing lullabies and sharing childhood memories. The process itself is centered on community co-creation, the result of ongoing community engagements, technology, tool sharing workshops, and educational programs manifests as public interventions, site-specific or site-responsive installations, augmented reality postcards, immersive installations, as well as participatory geolocated audio website where everyone is invited to share their lullabies. Co-creation and participation engages diverse groups of collaborators that are mobilized by the moral responsibility of everyone to speak out on social injustices and not just those who are most impacted. So Rashin Fahandej is A Father's Lullaby is the recipient of a Pre-Ars Electronica Festival 2021 Award of Distinction in Digital Musics and Sound Art, and is also part of a larger multifaceted project. So what you saw today is an excerpt of the installation, which you can visit at Soma Arts in San Francisco. But this project really exists also as such a larger series in pieces. So I am so curious, Rashin, how did this all begin?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. And I want to thank everybody who's been involved in making this project happen. I feel like this project is a family, and as it grows, its members grow, and it exists within the spaces and people and the spirits that sort of carry the project with them. So I want to thank you all for expanding this thoughts and ideas and exploration through the Father's Lullaby in San Francisco in Bay Area. So thank you for that. And as you mentioned, Sholejun, the project is multifaceted. Like what you see in the space of the installation, I can say is like 15-20% of the work that goes into the making of this project. And a big portion of it is that, I consider myself a documentarian, a multimedia artist, but also definitely at the core of it, a socially engaged artist. So I constantly think about processes of art making, especially when we are addressing social justice challenges that our society is facing. And one of the main inquiries and questions that I have constantly in the process is that how the processes could embody some of the changes that we envision. So in that sense, the process itself becomes an opportunity. The artistic sort of collaboration and creation becomes this opportunity to really think about equity, access, when we think about technology and even a simple video installation is still very hard to sort of realize in the public. So I'm really interested in different forms that the project could exist within the public realm, within the public space. So this project exists as a sound installation that you encounter the lullabies that is shared from the immediate community. And then those would become the entry point for you to sort of encounter the intimate stories and the audio documentaries in a way that the fathers who just released from federal probation have been sharing with me. It also like exists as a shipping container. So like in terms of even the installation, it exists in different form. Again, like with this idea that it goes into the public side and the engagement is happening in the public side, but also it has been sort of developing in different format inside the institutions. But it also in the process, I constantly try to have different form of engagement, of tool sharing and creating programs that then you work with the community who are impacted to share the tools, share the technology, learn to work with the tools and technology, and the process becomes co-creation in a way that the established sort of dynamics of media production as we know of it as an author, or documentarian, and the subject is really redefined. Like I'm really adamant on even vocabularies that we use, right? I don't want to use a subject anymore. It's the co-creators, they are community co-creators that they are coming and learning and thinking with the tools together and finding the best way that the stories could be shared. But of course, it's not very unilateral, like it's very organic, and it depends on the dialogue and conversations in the space. And I'm happy to tell more. I also bring that into my pedagogy now in Emerson College. So I teach a class that is community co-creation, where probation officers, fathers who are on probation, and the students work together throughout one semester in the class. And they research mass incarceration and they look at it from their own different perspectives as officers and as fathers who are going through this challenge. And also learn to work with 360 camera, learn to work with tilt brush with their children, and then sort of co-create a project together that sort of manifests their narrative and the stories, because there is an agency in that space that is created that is very different. And also in that sense, I also consider my audience a witness. And there are many ways that I think about how that sort of very intentional engagement could be mediated in a way. So all the fathers, like when you encounter the pieces, the installation pieces, they are very much based on memories and lullabies, and they trigger, like emotional connection for people in many different ways. But then to engage with the voices of fathers who are coming from a very vulnerable space, you have to give more of yourself. It's you have to sort of engage intentionally. So with the ICA, this excerpt that you saw, those were touch panels that when you sit down, you see yourself in the mirror. And then when you activate it through your touch, then you start hearing the fathers, like this very intimate audios of the fathers sharing their stories and the memories of childhood when they were gone, like their mother, their children. And then as long as you're holding the touch, you could hear. So people were like moving hand, putting their forehead, in order to sort of hold that connection. And you feel it in your physicality, like it's a work for you to sort of engage. And you could come to the installation and miss it totally, right? If you don't decide to engage, and that's part of it too. But I feel like once you're there, once you kind of have this embodied experience, that's like you're part of the, and that's, the hope. I sorry that I keep going on, but maybe one more aspect of it is also that I really try that in every installation, before you enter the room, there is an ask of you as a witness, that you think about your own memories of childhood, or lullaby or song that you remember, And also there is a website that you could, participate, thinking about this sort of every voice and every body matters when we want to bring change. And it's not only on the shoulder of those who are most impacted by it.
Thank you. Thank you. Covered a lot of my questions, and so no, you covered a lot of my questions. But I think the good thing is you and I can discuss and conversate about so many different aspects and crossovers of this project and of our works. And I think from some of the things that you mentioned, what really stands out to me is trust and vulnerability and intimacy. Within a space that may not, culturally be sort of granted permission within that, when we think of like a gendered male aspect. And also of the prison system of, is a very much a modern present day form of enslavement and labor. But I think, so thinking about trust and vulnerability and intimacy, so I think what's really beautiful is how you're asking everyone who enters the space to become present to that, to become witness. And it seems in this process of witnessing, you're also you're watching yourself as well. And I think within that element of witnessing, I can't help but think about time. There's this aspect of, I feel like, this past, present, and future when one is witnessing, because you're there, but you're also taking in a way, you're seeing yourself as part of a larger whole, I think, in this process. And so while you ask the viewers, right, everyone who enters into the space enters within prompts that may make one more likely or more participatory and sort of aware of that vulnerability and that intimacy and that space. How did you navigate that with the co-creators?
Yes, so to the point, and I really love how you speak into the time and this sort of relational aspect of the time, and definitely I think the project at its core is in a way a call to sort of be thinking about future and imagining the future through that a space of love and care. So it's definitely it sort of crosses all of these boundaries and borders, right? Through their, like, this sort of intimate stories. You hear the past. You get to kind of get a face of criminality, what we call criminality in this country, through the childhood memories of fathers. You kind of mentioned many different points. So maybe I will start with this. That's for example, like most of the fathers I talked to, they got into the system very young, like 8-year-old, 12 years old, and also their shared experiences of childhood is very similar. Like you kind of get, by hearing and listening to these stories, the systemic structural sort of violence of the absence and the incarceration becomes so apparent, because you realize, like, most of these fathers were coming from single parents or abusive, spaces, and also the mass incarceration, that it becomes sort of cyclical and generational, like mothers who had to work double job to just survive and provide for the family. And also you mentioned the masculinity. That's such an important part of this work. Like I was debating for a long time, like whether I want to call it a father's lullaby. And through actually those conversations, I realized that it has to be very gender specific, right? Because, like, not just because of the data only, 90, I should get you the exact date. Like the number of fathers who are like incarcerated, comparing to women, is dramatic. But also women incarceration has been raising up so much. But most of the fathers been talking about toxic masculinity, as one of the main factors. A lot of fathers didn't feel comfortable singing lullabies, like because there was this sort of gender role that they needed to hold on to. And it's sort of amplified and in this space of like being incarcerated, like in data space as well. So it's so beautiful for me to think about, and we are, sorry, I'm sort of like moving between different concepts, but I feel like with the space of masculinity and this sort of toxic masculinity, thinking about that, like how many men in our society and cross-border are sort of deprived of like having the full agency and the capacity to be the full human being, because there are certain expectations, right? Like the tenderness and love and care, or even like a simple thing like lullaby, like a lot of people were having difficulty associating with. So with that, like I love the fact that I can amplify and sort of give permission for these tender, loving voices to exist in the public side. So that's definitely, I really consider this also a feminist project, because I think until we reconsider masculinity, until we have like that sort of like a different vision for data space, it's very hard to think about gender equality and the relationships and all of that. So I think definitely in data space, I think I moved through multiple different things. You could like ground me again back with another question.
I must say that Rashid and I touched base this week, and I think our conversations can flow through and in and out and touch on a lot of things, which is one of the things I really enjoy. But I remember you mentioning, this aspect that you mentioned, that you do see it as a very feminist work, and about having this space to explore that. I was also reading about lullabies, and I attended the program that was with Some Arts, and around this larger exhibition about lullabies, and some of the basic things about lullabies that I read, they don't really mention male in a very general way when you read about lullabies. And I think one of the interesting things that I noticed about lullabies in terms of like reading a little bit about them is that how they're both to soothe the child. And I guess there's actual medical effects that singing a lullaby has on babies, and there's research on that, but also that it's a way to pass down, which I think you may have touched upon, which is cultural knowledge and wisdom and passing information. And I found it really interesting because it's also a very bodily way to pass it down. Like the lullaby has a sort of movement to it when you sing it, and I was reading that the movement is very similar to how you would rock a child. And so I began to speculate that this singing a lullaby, while it is for an infant or a baby, and I guess the songs themselves aren't always soothing. There are some very sort of very knowledge, don't do this kinds of lullabies that are sang, that are sort of warning of the danger. But they're all put within this kind of soothing movement. And I was really speculating how soothing that must be for the singer as well, for the one who does sing the lullaby. And I was wondering, what was your experience? I mean, were you with the co-creators?
I think that's the beauty of, like just a word when you say lullaby, right? As soon as you speak of lullaby, what is interesting is that I felt that it's like almost like a fine thread that is like connected to the heart and to this sort of like to the depth of the memory of everyone. But the beauty of it is the plurality, right? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't mean that we all go to the same place. We all go to many different, like unimaginable variation of a space of tenderness, calm, gentleness, memory, with all of its complexity. But the beauty of it is that it's very emotional. It's like a connected emotion. So I find this when I'm in person. I find it with the online tools, I'm still like not there to that it works successfully. And my goal is that the online tools that I use would become independent, that you could like kind of be devoid of artists. But when I'm in person, I feel like I make very little effort. As soon as and I talk not much at all. So a lot of the conversations, and there are many different contexts that I collect lullabies. Some of them are just like very one-off. Like I have even recorded on the corner stores. You know, I walk the neighborhood and I start talking to people with a few sentences. I say something about the project and I ask them, is that something that they're thinking about? But there are ones that they were longer sort of conversations. Many of the memories that you hear, they are now at SOMARS on QR tag, but it's available also. Feel free, Shayajan, to share the link to SoundCloud too, so the audios are available. Most of these were recorded actually at the Federal Probation Office in Boston. And I had the ICA exhibit, and for me, it's really important that the project exists within the community and sort of collects the local voices of the community. So that's what I really hope to happen in San Francisco, that like in the beginning, this is something that you hear, but then like it sort of evolves in a way that you hear people you might know in this space. But what happened was that a lot of it was that was at Federal Prison Probation Office, and we start a conversation, and some of it could be like an hour and a half, and I find it terrible. Like it seemed very like a flow of unconsciousness, and also a lot of sort of realization and therapeutic on the process. There is a lot of sort of reflection, and some of the fathers I like in continuous relationship based on their and they're very involved, and they know about where the project goes and what happens, or we have like phone conversations. I'm sort of thinking, and when you mentioned a space of vulnerability, that's also the same I felt with the community members, because this project is not only the conversations that I have with the formerly incarcerated fathers, it's also the broader community. And I find that also to be a very powerful space to come to, that you think about a presence that existed in your life, and then what does it mean to have that absent? And I think that sort of like becomes really tangible in a way that it's less, it's more embodied and emotional as an intellect, rather than like thinking in a way that it puts the audience in the, it puts the audience in a sort of outside of a space. Maybe like I can touch on that a bit too, because that's a very important component of the work, that I don't want the audience to come in thinking this is somebody else's story. Yes, they understand it, but this is somebody else's story. Like I would love the takeaway for most people to be in a way of like raising a lot of questions, like coming close to it, feeling it, and emotionally connecting to those stories, because I think the stories have that amazing power. But also I want the takeaway to be that this is happening under my watch in our country, and how do we need as a society to change our philosophy? Because it's a really philosophical question for a nation. If we are incarcerating people with this rate, and who's impacting, the most vulnerable part of the society. And then maybe let me give you, I'm going to end this talk, this line with the data that a lot of people don't know. So regardless of gender, race, and in the United States, based on the FBI data, 1 from every 3 American has criminal record. So like when you think about the structural aspect of this work and systemic aspect of the work is about, it's about control and it's about power. It doesn't mean that everybody's been incarcerated, but you are put in a very vulnerable space. 1 from out of 3 citizens. So that's why, like, I wanted to really bring it home for all of us, that it's our responsibility facing the realities in this sort of poetic, intimate way, but then considering the future, that time sort of travel that you were questioning. But then how can we look into the future with different philosophy and approach that is based on care and tenderness? Another data that to sort of make this tangible is that, like, if you consider how we educate our population, right? Like in a public, public education, most of the states, the average of a student to teacher is about 20 to 25 or 20 to 30 to 1 teacher, right? But if you consider, I would pose this question to you, like, what do you think is the ratio between prisoners and the prison guards? Like everybody, if you want to just
everyone, yeah, maybe, yeah.
if I'm just yeah,
Percy says
almost
4.
Yeah, Persis, thank you. Exactly.
Wow.
So in California, I think it's like around that 1 to 3, and then in most of the other states or some other states, there are like 1 to 5. So where our resources go? And again, like when you listen to these fathers' stories, like if you think about their childhood and why they are here, why they are where they are, regardless of all the the racial facts on like mass incarceration, it's really, yeah. So I want to really bring it back to us and bring it back to us as an audience and as a citizens to reconsider this.
Wow, that is staggering. I wasn't aware of that last ratio, and I think that also, really sort of covers the ground about this aspect of the piece, like the installation and its role, and where it's being shown and why it needs to be shown, but also why it needs to be interacted with and experienced, and this aspect where I feel like it comes from the heart. There's the heart connection first. There's not the statistical aspect first in terms of experiencing the piece, and this is what I think is really powerful about it. Is sadly there's so many things that can be rationalized and sort of reasoned with. But you can't really reason with the heart. You can't, and I mean, there's things that we know are not right or are not good. And I think that this connection with the heart, this very humanizing connection, and I think like bringing the piece into the community, and that this is us. There isn't a separation. We are witnessing us. We are witnessing our involvement, our connection with the state, with all of these aspects. And I think it's really, when I think about lullabies, I also think about this aspect. I feel like in lullabies I don't know, they're beautiful, but they're also kind of eerie. And there's this sort of like, there's fleeting in a way. There's songs, and they're in some way like both about the past and the future at the same time. They're sort of imbued with hopes and anxieties at the same time, and bringing, yeah, and there's this aspect, I feel, this cyclical movement within them, this time frame of thinking larger than one individual, very much like the incarceration system and its impact that it has on communities, on people, on families. It's multi-generational. And it's reverberating. It doesn't just affect one family. It affects everyone. And so I think this way that you pair that, it just really pulls on my heart threads in this very specific way, because you pair that along with the systemic and structural violence, with the violence of tearing families apart. And that's one thing that we, I think could probably touch upon, is the historical sort of like existence of strategic violence, of tearing families apart, whether it's through history, enslavement or slavery, or whether it's through the border or through the residential schools, it's something that seems to adapt itself to various modes of power. And I think that it can be insidious when we don't see something. And so this really, I felt when we were discussing some of this, I really connected some aspects of one of the sound and movement series that I was running, which was Majlis, that Percy's had visited, which is very much about, it was called Majlis, and it was about building sort of this collaboration or this collective sense of governance, but through creative movements. It was nonverbal. It was through sound and movement and voice and body and connecting in that way. So it was very strange things would happen. And I think it was one of those things where, if I were to mention to someone, any other day, well, there's a void in the corner of your room. And if you go stand in that void, you'll hear a certain frequency. Or what frequency do you hear? No one would believe me because we don't think about these things. But then when you're within a community or within a collective or a group and you actually go into that space that seems empty, you begin to listen and you can start to feel and you can see and you become attuned to your environment and your body's reaction to it. And I think how powerful to do that when you're in community. And other people are doing that through that same vulnerability. And I think that this really, I really connected with this aspect of the project of this sort of making the absence visible. What is that space? What is the space to mourn? What is the space to grieve? And what does it mean when we can't? What does it mean when we don't address the loss? When we don't address the loss of when we don't address the loss and we don't address the space in front of us, I think. And so to be able to do this through this project where you're making that absence visible through a presence that isn't performed, in a way it's witnessed or it's felt by touching the, what is it? Is it the plexiglass, the piece where you touch the wall? I thought it was incredibly powerful. And that actually, so now I'm kind of trailing off a little bit, but it's going to come back. And that actually makes me think about the pieces and how you have water and sand. And in the video installation, the section with the blackberries sort of being torn apart in the water. And it made me think about the role of the womb and the connection to that, both the connection to sound and water, that being the first things that we experience when we are sort of in the womb. We are feeling sound through water, and we are feeling voice, not even hearing. But I felt the connection between that and the video and how it begins with the cry for mother, which I can't help but think how that cry for mother is sort of, we're born with that, and many times we leave with that same cry. And I guess, was that something that you had thought about directly, or was it something that developed, or was it a part of the co-creation process, these sort of vignettes?
Thank you, Shola June. This was like really nice, the way that you sort of brought everything into
I'm glad it landed.
forward. Because there is so much, just like talking about the piece itself. Yes, so the piece starts as the immersive space sort of starts with just sound and voice, and what you said, the call for mother. So like it's a voice of man saying my mother, and it sort of repeats. That it comes from one of the interviews that I can play some of that as well. Like I can play some sound clips for you to get a taste.
That might be nice.
Or feeling, yes. And then the piece is in 5 movements. So I worked with a lot of collaboration in the process, and I had 2 main composer collaborators for this project. That there was a lot of conversation, and they have 2 different style of work, but I knew that this is what I want to sort of merge and bring them together that way. And there is a lot of dialogue. So if you go to the sort of technical aspect of the work, there is a lot of dialogue between the editing of the video and the editing of the audio. And there is a lot of back and forth, and there is a lot of weight given to the audio. So a lot of things I imagine in the audio, and then sort of like the visuals sort of emerge or sort of mix together. But definitely there is a narrative, like it's a cyclical narrative there. It's not a linear conventional narrative, but there is definitely like a narrative that for me sort of metaphorically and poetically connects the past and the present, you know, through the water, and these sort of some sort of specific way that I chose the visuals or chose to capture like the women's voices, faces, or the men who's dancing in a section, and you see it almost like his reflection. All of that for me was a lot of connecting to the past and connecting to that space of you know, forced movement and migration, and sort of the water, like that it sort of divides this space but also carries the history of so many people who were lost like on the way even getting here, and also like the berries and the end that sort of, so there are 5 movements. So I really think about it more as a I'm not a musician, but I really think about it as sort of a music, a score in a way, and that it has this sort of visual poetry along with it. And it ends with sort of start merging with mothers' stories and their perspective in this space, and then ends with the mother singing a motherless child at the end with this sort of powerful voice. And the visuals become really sort of that sort of berries and the water scenes that it's at the end. It has like both a space of touch and tender and in a way survival. I was looking at like how when slaves were running away, like what they were surviving on in the forest and in the patch of like going to the freedom. But at the same time, it's also very much, there is a lot of trauma there. Like there is a lot of like the texture of the fruits becomes like almost like a flesh of the body for me. So I don't talk about the work this way that I do now, but there is a lot sort of going on, and I'm really drawn to sound and visuals that they are many layers and many emotions that you kind of see it, and it raises more question than clarity. So I'm not interested in like giving an answer. I'm really interested in kind of putting you in a place that there are all these sort of emotions and feelings evokes. And there is also like with that, actually, there is a big intentionality in terms of you as a viewer. You know, I like my audience now, even though I grew up in Iran, I grew up as a minority who was like persecuted and discriminated in Iran. Like I'm coming to it really being aware of where the show is, you know, the work is being presented, and the context of where I'm drawing this sort of systemic injustices, right? Like even though I draw from my own experience, moving through those experiences of my early childhood, like I see a deep connection between, you know, this work and you know, and my thinking about like Baha'i community back home. So, but what I want to say is that like I'm very aware that like of the context of the colonial context of United States and Western world and my Western audience, and there is an intentionality of not allowing to the viewer to have the full agency over the work. Because there is that tendency in the colonial sense that, like, if I want to go there, is that there is sort of like when you know something, there is a power over it, right? So a lot of people come to this piece expecting the fathers who've been incarcerated be the only one who's singing lullabies. But actually, in the reality, most of the time, the fathers are in like groups, so you don't know who's really the incarcerated. And I use different technology from you know, like the sound that you mentioned. There are these steel dusts that they were animated by another collaborator, like one by one, literally, to kind of represent this graph of incarceration from 1955 to 2015. That is sort of dramatic wave that you see at the beginning of the piece. I'm happy to also share that clip. Is the graph of mass incarceration, and also the absence that you see. There is also grids that I use, and the faces that is being covered, and also that's based on the data. Like I don't talk about them, but I think visually they are sort of giving you the feeling and that sort of paradox of what's happening there. So in United States, from every 3 African American, what one would experience incarceration in their lifetime. And from every 6 Latino, one would experience incarceration in their lifetime. So there are like this sort of some of these data is sort of visualized in this sort of poetic way. But where you see the father who just directly talks at you about his absence and about his incarceration and the fact that he never knew his own father, I use volumetric filmmaking that allows for this sort of really ambiguous space of being in the space of presence and absence. So his body vibrates, the particles of his body vibrates when he talks. And you sort of get this sort of eerie feeling of somebody being there, but you're not able to fully sort of see them who they are. And the only way that you get the very intimate space, again, like it's just through audio, which also I really feel there is a great power in that. Like that's a really interesting way of encountering. It's like a touch, right? That's like our haptic, like the visual is not, it's not a touch in a physical sense, right? But, or, you know, light could be touch, but what I think about audio is this sort of vibration. The way that you understand the audio is this vibrations through your ear and your body. So it's a very interesting way also to think about like the encounters in all different subtle ways. Maybe I'm conscious of time and everybody's time today, so I can show a clip, but also like would be great to you know make sure that our audiences are also can raise their questions, and also Sholejun, you could like finish your thoughts with the ending. Should I present a clip, maybe an audio clip?
I think it's, I think it's a great time, to do that.
And please, you know, when I say collaboration and co-creation, we are making a space together here. So I would really love for you to, you know, think about your thoughts and questions. And I really invite everybody to visit the exhibition and the gallery space. There are many amazing projects there. But also like the Father's Lullaby is a room with projections and audios that we could encounter. Let me see.
Perhaps as you're pulling up the file, I could ask you a short question as you pull up the file, and then we can listen to the file and go into the questions and engagement. I did want to note that the aspect of ambiguity, I think, really stood out to me from what you were just speaking about, and ambiguity is a threat. I think within Western societies, it's such a threat, and so I think to expand that space is so important and valuable in very sort of embodied haptic ways, as you mentioned, in some kind of a way of building a sort of memory and passing the knowledge down in ways that, you know, maybe aren't prescriptive through language or through words or through the structure even of the language and the violence that it carries. As you mentioned, some of the words that are being used and such that you came across. But before you do pull up the sound clip, and I think you probably found it by now, I did have one question, is if there were one thing that you would want people to walk away from with it, besides being co-creators and collaborators, what would it be?
Maybe before answering this one, can I say something?
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you brought up that sort of this sort of pre-language space of processing and encountering. And we are in Western world very much like word and language based. So it's interesting that like there is a lot of desire to sort of verbalize it. And when people are not able to actually fully identify at the beginning, you know, later you kind of like, so I feel like that's a powerful space to be, that there is a lot of like kind of questions and feeling and understanding, but there is sort of this sort of layering. And what you mentioned that you know, when I think about the Persian culture, right? Like I feel like the poetry that everybody knows Hafiz poetry or like Rumi's poetry or Sadi, and there's so much layering and ambiguity there. That's why we could do follow Hafiz, right? That's the only way that we could, because everybody could interpret it in different ways, and all of it is right. All of it has like deep connection with us, but is right. Or I, really think about this project as a, like almost, because I talk about it as a ecosystem, and in my mind that visual representation is like Persian carpet, because like there are all these like different floral and design and like all these different intricate elements that, then they come together and they make this sort of meaning as a collective in a bigger sense, right? In this sort of profound, bigger space. But so that's like, these are sort of my references when I'm constantly thinking about that there is a power in complexity. There is a power in ambiguity. And that's creating a space that allows for plurality. I can't say that word, but it allows for different ideas to coexist, even contradicting ideas to coexist. And that's what I would love. That's why I also really try hard to not talk at the system and really talk with the system, because I'm really interested in creating these spaces that allows multiple entry points, that you could come from totally different point of view and a space, but you still would connect and you move away. And could, like, going back to your question about what is the main takeaway, like, of course I can't do that with everybody, right? But I'm hoping that my audience or witness would leave this space feeling a sense of connection, and also feeling a sense of urgency to question more.
Great.
So I think I'm really, I think that space of active questioning and inquiry is a very powerful space as well. Like, and is a very active space.
That's beautiful. And I think also by nature of that is you now have an absence. You're aware of an absence when you leave. Through that.
So I'm sort of debating whether the last should be the 2-minute piece or a bit of a sound, maybe Persis and Sholeh, you can help me. So I have the 2-minute video and audio, or also I can play some of the sound. I'm happy to also put the sound cloud in the chat for everybody to. What would you say?
I mean, I hope people go visit the exhibit.
For sure.
One of the things that was so powerful for me about listening to the SoundCloud recordings was that you hear in their voices something that's bodily and vulnerable. And I think sometimes when you're not looking at an image, you're forced to experience it differently. So that, to me, I found their voices quite haunting in the way that they tell the stories, and that the story is what's center stage. Their voice and their story is center stage, as opposed to like the whole visual, like we're watching a movie, as opposed to like forced to kind of consider the storytelling.
I'm inclined towards listening to the sound as well, because I feel the installation, you have to be in there. We got a taste of it, and I really encourage everyone to go visit and check out Rashin's piece, but also everyone else's piece. It's something you just really have to be immersed in. But
okay, thank you. So I'll do that. Maybe there are 3 characters that their full story, the audio narrative, they are each about 9 to 11, 12 minutes. And they were put together as this sort of chain of stories. Again, like I think about this sort of cyclical narration, that there's no beginning or end, but there are these like encapsulated moments from their life that they are sort of chained together. And you can like get more a sense of their space the more you listen to. And you have a more fuller picture the more you listen to. But you could also listen to like a segment, and you still, I feel like for me, they encapsulate their life in a very powerful way, as Persis mentioned. So maybe I'll play a little bit piece of both two of the fathers
And if you have questions, get ready because she'll.
Yes, please.
Yes.
That
Yes,
would
this
be
would be a
very,
good time to gather your questions as you listen and reflect.
yes. Yes, please do that. Let me share. Let me know if you have the sound. So this is Kevin. This like his story just like encapsulates so beautifully. So I'll play that a portion of that.
Teaching me everything that I needed to know, the birds and the bees and stuff.
Hold on 1 second, sorry.
My mother was my father, teaching me everything that I needed to know, the birds and the bees and stuff like that. She just gave me so much love and support. I mean, she poured her heart out for everything. I mean, it's just hard to describe. She showed it to me. She worked 2 jobs to take care of me. Then she got another job as a bank teller. And then I used to see her more often because it was like a 9-to-5 job. I used to have daily chores around the house. After the chores was done, I'd wait. I'd watch my cartoons. I used to fix my famous cheese toast. And then I used to go out on the front steps and wait for her to walk down the street. She had a mask on with me during my incarceration. She wanted me to look at a picture where she was all right, but she wasn't. So I think she was dealing with a lot of trauma because of my absence, me not being there. She's up in the age where I think right now she's like fearing death, you know what I mean? So I think me being released a little early is like a relief for her. So I try to spend as much time as I can with her.
Yeah, so please, I love to kind of for people to listen to the entire story. Like after this, he goes into talking about, you know, how he was incarcerated and the moment that his children, he had a twin, 6-month-old twins that they came to visit him. And so I think like no matter how much I talk, like I feel the experience is the power of the work and their stories and the way that they carry their own story is the power of the work. But I want to play for you like a little short excerpt from Sean, and you can sort of see different but I'll start with that.
Most people expect me to be dead or in jail because of the life I lived before I had my child. A couple years ago when I didn't have children, my parents aren't in my life, I didn't have anybody, and I was okay with not doing the right thing. That's unacceptable now, especially when I look at my child's face. I can't even think about making wrong decisions anymore. I just want to be the best father I can. My mother did the best she could, but coming from an abusive home, I got all the wrong discipline, so I wasn't afraid to get in trouble. I figured I was going to get my ass kicked anyway, so what was the difference? I don't think my father ever told me once that he loved me. My father was definitely raised in a different time, in a different place. My father was an alcoholic as well, so most of the time in my childhood it was bad memories. It was a lot of verbal abuse, physical abuse. To this day, My father's not in my life. I don't care to let him in my life. I don't want him in my life because I don't want to expose my children to that.
Sorry, I'm like jumping a bit around.
My life.
Just
Has
for you
changed
to.
my life, and has shown me a different path. And I don't think if it wasn't for my children, I would probably be dead or serving a life sentence for hurting somebody else. And that's the way my life went for a long time until these children came into my life. They saved me. It's the most pleasure I have in my life currently and have ever had in my life is being a father to my children. It's everything. There's nothing that I want to do other than be a good father. And then I always tell him I love him. Right as he's falling asleep, I try to get him and let him know that he means everything to me. And I give him a kiss and I let him fall asleep. Right as he's falling asleep, let him know that he means everything. Let him know that he means everything to me. I love him, love him. I give him a kiss, I give him a kiss, and I let him fall asleep. I love him, I love him, I love him. And then I always tell him I love him. Right as he's falling asleep, I try to get him and let him know that he means everything to me.
Thank you, Rashin
Thank you,
John.
everyone.
Wow. Thank you. What a violence that wages loss that's irreconcilable, I think. So I think it's we could open up to questions, comments, reflections from everyone. Please either unmute yourself or put your hand up or drop something in the chat box.
Rashin, I'm so curious what these men, particularly the men who you've been engaged with, they got to see this, and they got to see it both in terms of their participation, but also in terms of the curation, which I think is really powerful, is that it's not just raw footage, it's that you've made it come alive in various ways. And what was their response to it?
Yeah, so definitely some fathers been more engaged and like see more of the exhibit. So for example, Kevin has been like in like all the installations and it's really we had a long conversation with Kevin together after the show because he came to the opening and he was people witnessing his story, and a lot of people kind of left. For me, that's not the sign of like connecting or emotion, but a lot of people were leaving very emotional or teary and they were listening to these stories, and Kevin was there. So for him, he had a lot of conversation. We had a lot of conversation together that he was talking about what it meant for him to tell his story when we were talking, and like in our intimate sort of setting of just like him like opening up and like talking about his life experiences is such a generous space when people just open up and start sharing with you this sort of really intimate emotional moments of their life, and it's like so heavy and there is so much loss that is sort of carried, but we are all survivors as human beings, so like there is also so much optimism like in their approach of like what the life can be and what they want for their next generation. So we were talking about that, and definitely like from his word, like definitely these are like encountering it with this space, like they cannot imagine what the project would look like, because unfortunately it doesn't mean when I say co-creation, it doesn't mean that I co-create in every stage or all the aspects of the work is co-created. There are parts of the work that it's like really working together, or for example certain setting like the Emerson class is like intentionally made to really realize that co-creation aspect in that sort of optimum way that I can imagine. I'm sort of institutionalizing that idea of like how can we disrupt and create new ways of documentary making or media making, that it sort of embodies in the process and kind of raise all these questions. But some of these, like for example with Kevin, I had a conversation, and he didn't have, like in our process or in their life, there was not the capacity to really get them engaged in selecting. But it's powerful is to sort of seeing them, witnessing it, and sort of feeling that their work it becomes part of, like, it's hard for me to sort of maybe verbalize, but the combination of these, again, like it's like looking at something that is powerful and listening to it, but then when they are all these juxtapositions, or the way that the work is selected, there is this sort of focus and intention on certain aspect of the life that I feel it carries. But also sadly, like this space is so difficult, like emotionally difficult for me, right? Because many fathers go back. That's the reality of this space. Like it's very temporal. We have 86. I don't want to, like, maybe don't quote me on the number. I'm not good. Like, even though I look at them every day, like I think it's about 86. Like it's a very high number. Recidivism in the United States is around 86. So that's the system is made in a way that it's just a cyclical way of like putting people out and bringing them back in. It's very difficult for them to reaccumulate or come to the again, because of the policies, like the very challenging policies that we have set in place, the way that we are sentencing, and then also the way that we provide support. Many of these fathers come out with a lot of debts and loans because of phone call or to the family members, or like buying things that they need. It's a capitalist system. We are like, this is the prison industrial complex is a capitalist system that we are basically making money off of other people's existence. So what I want to say is that it's also the sad reality of this is that not all the fathers are out, and it's a very temporal space. Kevin was a very good example. There are other ones, of course, too, but there are like amazing fathers who are like doing now. One of the fathers who is not in these audios, but in the big installation, he's having his own company, like music company. There are like success stories too, but it's very hard. And one of the main challenges outside of the systemic challenges is the emotional connection or reconnection with their family. So and the fact that they have lost that long stretch of time and memory and history and connection, right? Like, so if Kevin was away 20 years, and so when he came back, like his children were over 20 years old. When he left, they were 6 months old. So they all talk about that and the challenges of confronting that reality.
Well, I just want to say thank you for this. Really, it's very powerful and interesting work, and it feels so relevant to me right now, especially because it's, as you say, it's the same cyclical and systemic system that creates racial inequality in every facet of American life. So, but seeing it from the point of view of men, I think is also really important, because we have a tendency to sort of, look at incarcerated men as either villains or victims, and not human beings who live a life cycle and who are also, I mean, there's even a sort of a tendency to think of fathers who are incarcerated as having abandoned their children, right? So they get stigmatized in all sorts of ways, including by their own children who feel abandoned by them. But it was so nice to hear that Kevin piece, because you can just feel the pain of having exactly what you said, lost that time with his children. And also the idea of the systemic ways that fathers have been absent for their children that is recreated in a systemic way, right? So that his example of being in an abusive home where his father was either checked out and drunk or abusive is a form of absentee fatherhood. And then he walks into a system that is ripe for exploiting that, right? So I think it's really interesting to sort of think about these kind of patterns that are both in the domestic realm and then they become institutional. And I thought your pieces kind of capture that, which is part of what we don't sometimes understand, is the relationship between the personal and the historical or political, and the kind of helplessness that people often, to me, it's like a tide, right? You're getting carried into the tide and you're getting pushed out and carried back in, pushed out, carried back in. Like the sort of water imagery of it works for me too. So I just want to say, I'm so grateful that you're doing this kind of work, because it's sort of often is not looked at in a sort of artistic, it's important to find ways to enter the conversation that doesn't just repeat the same old narratives.
I want to add on to that, actually, Percy, Stranya. I feel very much the same way. It's coming from the artistic perspective, and I think from the sort of the embodied connection and from that feeling part. And I mean, you have these statistics sort of buried in there and cleverly, but they're not things that we need to know to when we're experiencing the piece. To be able to connect or to feel. And yeah, and that meant that comment that you mentioned, Perseus, about the humanistic aspect is we often talk about women and children, which we need to, but we don't usually talk about the men, the male gender is the sort of soldier or the criminal or the villain or.
Yeah. Thank you to Bangu and Dugyu for hosting this exhibit, which I haven't seen it yet, but I intend to go. And I do hope that you get some local participation.
Yeah, so maybe I can plug that in. Tomorrow evening from 5:30 to 7, I will be there, and Bengu, I think you're also planning to be there. So we will be there for sure. So if you had time to stop by and see the exhibition, you could also talk to us. And Bengu has a lot of stories for other artists that they are in the exhibit and in the project. So it's a really wonderful exhibition that brings many different perspectives into this space. But also, I want to thank you all. I think this is incredible. As I said, I feel like the family of this project and work is sort of expanding to each person and single one of you. So I want to thank you for that and all the support that it's sort of given through all of you to make the project realize in San Francisco. And I consider it really the beginning of the dialogue in Bay Area, and I hope for many more conversations and dialogue and engagement and actions to sort of grow from this work. So I definitely encourage you. What you see at SOMART is a version of the project, but it's a site responsive installation. So everywhere it goes, I really hope that new form of collaborations shapes, and I'm already sort of scheduling recordings, and so there will be local voices that it will be part of the project, and also the project expands through you, through your there is a website that we could share that you could definitely go and record your own voice, talk your memories and histories and your reflection. But also I'm curious to the amazing thing about collaboration and co-creation is that you're opening up for things to come your way that you never imagined yourself. And that's the beauty of it. That's sort of like that collective wisdom and collective imagining. So I really kind of rely on everybody's shoulder in terms of thinking about like how this project could become an entry point for thinking about change and for thinking about real actions in the community. So I wanted to just sort of open up that invitation to everybody.
So thanks again to Dugyo and Bengu for their work in curating this and bringing Rashin and her exhibit. Thanks to Diaspora Arts Connection. Thank you to UC Davis. Thank you to SOMARTS. And thank all of you for coming. And Rashin and Sholay especially. I love seeing people that didn't know each other being engaged and enriching both of your work. So thank you again. And this will be recorded. So if you want to listen to it or pass it on to others, you'll find it on our YouTube channel in a few weeks. Okay.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
having
so
me.
much.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Shola June.
Thank you.
so
I
much,
told everyone we could
Persis,
talk
Nazi,
forever.
Bengu. Yeah, I know.
But,
We had like an incredible conversation yesterday. I'm excited to know you all.
continue this.
I'm sorry I won't be
Yeah.
able to go tomorrow, but
That's okay.
I'm there in spirit.
All
Thank you, Nazi, too, by the way.
right.
Thank you, Nazi.
Thank you, Nazi Jan. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.